Okay, so I've been looking at the week's events with great interest, and I'm going to make a case that's very different than what I normally do. I'm a little out on a limb here, but if you follow me, you can kind of see why I'm seeing things the way that they are. I'm going to make the case that Putin is not quite right and he's scared. Now, I don't mean scared like, oh, huddling in a corner, but he's not taking the actions that are consistent with somebody that feels like that they are in control. Okay, so that's what I mean by scared. So I want you to imagine for a moment that you're on an elementary school playground, and I'm going to give you an analogy. And the analogy, all analogies by nature are imperfect. So it doesn't hold up in some places, but it'll give you a sense of what's going on. Two high school kids, juniors or seniors in high school, come onto the playground, and the playground is geared through kindergarten through eighth grade, and they find a couple of eighth graders and they think, okay, these eighth graders, they have money. So they start to shake down the eighth graders, and the eighth graders fight back. And the eighth graders are fighting back, and they did not mean to get entangled with these kids. They were just trying to quickly steal some of their money and go, but they're having a hard time escaping from the playground because these few eighth graders that they picked on were actually tougher than they thought and keeping them there and fighting back, and it's bloodied one nose and whatever else, right? So instead of fighting with them while they're trying to get off the playground, they see a second grader and they bash the second grader's head against the wall, and the second grader's like out cold on the ground. And then they see a first grader and they kick them in the stomach, and the first grader's crippled over, like trying to breathe. And that's the kind of thing that they're doing. Instead of like really taking on these kids that they're actually after, they're really just doing havoc to as many innocents as possible. That's an analogy that kind of explains what's happening in Ukraine. So again, I know it's not a perfect analogy, but I think it's actually explanatory. So since the Kerch Bridge, and remember, this was the second time that the Kerch Bridge was hit, we see Russia really just going after, well, they backed out of the grain deal, and it wasn't tied to the Kerch Bridge, but now that they backed out of the grain deal, they're trying to do as much damage and havoc to the grain stores and residential populations, a church, all kinds of things as possible, knowing full well that it could very well be that tens of millions of people could be plunged into food insecurity. Okay, so this is Jake Bro talking 2 or 3 days ago about what has happened over the first 4 days since the Kerch attack.
Also, Russia continues to fire on and destroy Odessa's harbor. This is just a tragedy all around. So every night the attacks continue, as well as with the city of Mykolaiv. In just 4 days, from the 18th to the 21st, Russia's armed forces have launched 157 missiles and combat drones against the civilian infrastructure of Odessa and Mykolaiv. These pictures...
So that's 157 in 4 days. We're 3 days past when he was talking about this, and the hits keep coming.
They're heartbreaking. Missile strikes last night destroyed 100 tons of peas and 20 tons of barley. UNESCO condemns Russian attack on Odessa's historic center. So this is Odessa's historic downtown, currently being indiscriminately fired on and destroyed. Russia's objective is now to turn Odessa into Mariupol or Bakhmut. Just fire on everyone, destroy everything. Including churches. Russia bombed the beautiful Transfiguration Cathedral in Odessa, originally built in 1794. Stalin destroyed it. I'm not sure when, but it was rebuilt by Ukraine in 2010. A very beautiful cathedral, and this is what it currently looks like. Russia used their long-range precision weapons to destroy this church deliberately. For report,
Now, is that the action of someone who thinks that they're in control? Now he's going to go and he's going to have an interview here. I'm going to skip the interview and I'm going to get his final comments.
So the Russian military doesn't know how to defeat the Ukrainian military. If they actually used all these missiles and drones to attack valid military Ukrainian targets, Russia doesn't think that would do anything. They think that's a waste of their missiles and time. So when Russia declares they're going to go after Ukraine's energy grid, their energy infrastructure, now during the summertime they're going to go after the ports and destroy their agricultural sector. They're doing this because they don't know how to militarily defeat the Ukrainian armed forces. They don't think they can. So they're desperate, they're scared, and they're willing to try anything. Let's go after the energy infrastructure. Let's go after their agricultural sector. It's all they got. Terrorism against civilians is, they believe, they're admitting it, their only chance and hope to win this war.
Okay. Terrorism is all they've got. They're desperate, they're scared, and this is my case. I mean, you wouldn't take these kinds of actions if you were actually in command and control. Kyiv strikes an ammunition depot in Crimea on July 22nd, and that was a pretty big punch to that Russian psyche that's already kind of damaged. Like, wait, you're not supposed to be able to strike into Crimea. Remember, Crimea, we have all these defenses, but they're able to do it. Here are some images of what happened in this strike. And here is another view of this. I'm not going to actually play any of these, but you can see these. You can look these up yourself. And then what was interesting about this was that the drone attack on the Crimea ammunition depot closes the bridge. Like, they're worried, right, about that bridge being struck again. Otherwise, you wouldn't be closing the bridge. Here's what the depot strike looked like. And you think, okay, that's big, right? So maybe the bridge was in proximity, but the bridge wasn't in proximity. This is where the depot was. Here's the bridge. The bridge got closed because of this. Something's going on. They're very, very skittish. Okay, then we see this. So again, while they're testing, and remember, the psyche is like, show that you're tough and that kind of thing. So they spend their time, this was on RT, showing how they have these missile drills to show that they can actually shoot down a ship that's not moving. So they do this missile test in the Black Sea to just show how tough they are. And this is part of what's carried in RT. They've shown that they've been able to fire a rocket at a ship that's not moving and sink it. Okay, so that's all well and good, but this bluster is, it's not just bluster, it's extra bluster. And the extra bluster comes at a time where they've just been damaged, and then they're damaged yet again because, yes, Crimea hit something big. This was on an airstrip, and how did they get to wherever it was? Well, this was a tweet from Noel Reports. UAVs took off from Kyiv. Kyiv is up here somewhere, and then they went down toward Odessa, so the radar stopped tracking it. And then from Odessa, it came in. So UAVs took off from Kyiv, reached Odessa and Mykolaiv region, and then from there diverted into Crimea to confuse Russian air defense. In parallel with this, 4 Storm Shadow cruise missiles were launched by Su-24 aircraft off the Ukrainian Air Force. 3 aimed at a warehouse with ammunition in the vicinity of Vilny, Volosai airstrip, and 1 repair base near this other city I can't pronounce very well. All 4 hit the target. So they're not all that happy about that. Coupled with that, they're even less happy about this. Russia says that Ukrainian drones hit central Moscow and Crimea. We just talked about Crimea. The central Moscow one, they were trying to hit the Russian Ministry of Defense. Now, these things were diverted, but they were 500 meters from the Russian Ministry of Defense. In fact, one of the places that they hit was a legitimate target. This was some kind of office building or something. It still did some significant damage. 500 meters. That's just slightly than 1 lap around a track. 1 lap around a regulation track is 400 meters. 500 meters. They were really close to hitting the Russian Ministry of Defense. Yet they're considered terrorists because of their action. And in fact, yesterday I was talking about this. I can't think of anything that the Ukrainians can do that they wouldn't be called a terrorist for doing it if they're doing something to Russia. That's just the way that the Russians process it. But what was interesting about this was there wasn't really much in RT. This is RT videos. There is a Moscow under a drone attack, drone footage, and then one more up here about where is it? Moscow attack aftermath. But that's it. It was pretty much buried. Like, this was a pretty significant event, and yet it's bookended between protests in Bangkok and Barnaul's Zoo cougar kittens taste meat for the first time. Like, that's it. There was as much press coverage about the non-event of Putin and Lukashenko talking about Belarusians, Wagner's forces in Belarus potentially invading Poland. Like, same amount of coverage. So they're trying to bury this. And that's, I find, very interesting. Let me keep moving. We have this other event trying to make the world starve. Russian drones destroying grains in warehouses in Ukrainian ports. So they're moving up the Danube. And where is this? This is a place called Renzi. So I heard Renzi and the Danube, and I thought, wait a minute, that sounds familiar. Well, I look at a map, and Renzi's here. So Odessa's here. Here's that little bit of the remaining bit of Ukraine. Here's the Danube River. Here's Galat. Galat is in Romania. I've been to Galat. I actually stepped in the Danube. This was not one of my brighter shining moments, but just to say that I set foot in the Danube River, I put my foot in it, like I was wearing a shoe, but I still, just enough to get it just slightly wet, and I kind of sank into the mud and almost lost my shoe, okay? I know where I'm talking about here. This is 3 miles from the Romanian border, and the Russians are striking this port warehouse 3 miles from the border, knowing full well that if they just missed a little bit, you could be in a hot war with NATO. Like, that's what. So taking this extra risk doesn't make any sense. Here, let me pan out on Galat, and here's Romania. Moldova's here. This is the very corner of Ukraine. Moldova's right. Like you're like taking that risk doesn't make any sense at all. Unless you're really, really scared. And that's my argument. I don't mean that he's like, oh, what's going to happen? I mean, he's taking irrational actions, or actions that he rationally would not otherwise take if he thought differently. Okay. Now, let's wrap this up with a Russian deputy foreign minister. His name is Sergei Rybkov. Now, let's hear what he has to say. And just listen to his words and think, does that sound right?
The US and other Western countries are making mistake after mistake. In general, their path in recent years is a path of mistakes and suffering. Suffering not actually on matters of international affairs, but in the inability to combine their ambitions, their arrogant expectation that everyone around them should obey them, and what they see in practice.
Well, I'm saying that about the U.S., but that sounds like Russia making mistake after mistake, and their ambitions that everyone around them should obey them. I mean, it's really bizarre to hear him speak.
One once used the expression impotent rage to describe this situation. I don't want to use this kind of cliche, but the facts remain facts. We're dealing with a deep foreign policy imbalance. This is something.
But that impotent rage, isn't that what we're seeing this week? What Russia is doing, this impotent rage?
That could be described in terminology as a dangerous mixture of megalomania with an inferiority complex.
It's really striking how he just summarized what has been transpiring from the Russians on the Ukrainians over the course of the past week, and like he doesn't even see the irony in it. Okay, that's my case. Now, I could be wrong. You could have a different perspective. If you do, please provide it. I'd like to see more clearly than I do. Thank you for your time. Thank you for the likes and the shares and the subscribes. And thank you more than anything else for being the kind of person that cares about Ukraine.